On September 27th, 1986, metal collectively mourned the passing of Cliff Burton, who died in a bus accident that occurred in Sweden. Here with the What If game, one of the principal influences and one of the principal requests that I get is what would have happened if Cliff Burton hadn't died? Or what if the bus accident had never happened? If Cliff Burton remained alive and lived to see September the 28th of that year? There's also a secondary section of individuals. These are ones that are fiercely populated on the internet, but I also get this request as well, that state, what if Lars Ulrich had been the one who died on that bus as opposed to Cliff Burton? And notice I say that with a little bit of a sneer. I say that with a little bit of pain in my face. It's principally because, first of all, this is something that is largely based around their personal opinions just of Lars Ulrich. Whether it be based around the Napster situation or whatever it may be, whatever has caused this bane or ire. Principally because a lot of people believe in an urban legend that Lars was the individual that was competing with Cliff Burton for that spot, for that cubicle on the bus, when in reality it was Cliff Burton and Kirk that were really the ones that were competing for it. And, well, unfortunately, Cliff Burton was the one who won the card game, and really would have been unfortunate either way, considering the result. We will handle two separate timelines, and we will account for both of them. I'm not happy about it, and you might not like the result, but hey, you're the ones that decided to be kind of assholes about it. We're going to start with the one that's more on people's minds of what if Cliff Burton had survived? What if Metallica didn't have to go out and get a new bass player after Master of Puppets was released? What if the band was able to continue with their original foursome? Was this something that was going to last forever? And the answer to that question actually is, I think it actually would have. This is a group of four that, and this is again something that may cheese some people off, so to speak. I think this is a group of four that was tightened in enough where they probably would have been able to last the test of time. If you think about it, the position of bass has been the only position within the band that has encountered any sort of change in the lineup ever since the Kill 'Em All days, when Dave Mustaine was the final person to actually leave the band. If you remember, the original lineup of Metallica was Lars Ulrich, James Hetfield, Ron McGovey, and Dave Mustaine. McGovey and Mustaine were out, Burton and Kirk were in. I think that foursome really had the opportunity to make it through, last the test of time, and be real Iron Men whenever it came to the lineups and everything of that regard. Now, many people think that that wouldn't be the case, principally because of the Black Album and the change of direction. But you have to remember something. If Cliff Burton was alive, and Cliff Burton never dies, who says the Black Album even happens? The result that you actually get from this is that you no doubt have a very And Justice for All-like album that is released in the latter portions of the 1980s. Cliff Burton is on this release. He has penned some lyrics for it. They are already working on it. The bass sound on this is probably not tampered with all of that much. Of course, that's one of the principal complaints that some people do have about And Justice for All, is that the bass sound is barely audible, and some people say it's a form of hazing for Jason Newsted. Jason Newsted, by the way, continues to play in Flotsam and Jetsam, and the band gets a little bit more recognition than they, did in reality. A lot of people say that their album sort of fell off after Doomsday for the Deceiver, but in reality they didn't. They were very solid as well. With the addition of Jason Newsted on bass, and also doing some writing for the band, the following albums after that actually do a fair bit better, and Flotsam and Jetsam becomes a lot more well-respected in the metal universe, as opposed to just sort of being an underground secret that a lot of us old folks seem to know. Yeah, I'm actually referring myself to an old folk in this one. Now, while I think Cliff Burton would be one to sort of question the idea of going with a producer such as Bob Rock, considering they'd had such great success with Flaming Rasmussen, I don't think that he would be the saving grace that would keep everybody from getting the big bad Black Album that everybody seems to have such a problem with. When in reality, the Black Album was a transitional album that sort of flowed with the times, and this is probably something that didn't have as much to do with the band themselves as it probably did the record label, and really the whole changeover in direction, and a lot of people realizing that thrash metal was a breed of popularized metal in the 1980s that was slowly meeting its endpoint with other fashions of music really rising from the ashes and becoming bigger and badder than perhaps thrash metal was going to be able to do it after the 1990s. Plus, it was becoming a bit of a saturated market. So I think the Black Album still remains. However, I think that the songwriting on this album certainly takes a little bit of a shift. It's one that I think is going to have a really different vibe to it. It may not even necessarily be called the Black Album, though I think that that's iconic enough where it really does... being self-titled really has a big benefit. I think where you're going to see the huge deviation point is whenever you get to James's pyrotechnic accident and you get to Load and Reload. I think that these songs are where you're going to see Cliff Burton maybe put up a little bit more of a fight, either that or really decide to tell the band that he's kind of on board for this, but would like to tackle things with a little bit more aggression. That seems to be, again, one of the running theories. But you have to remember that Cliff also was a guy that just had a lot of talent on bass. He had a lot to offer. So, in reality, the Load and Reload cycle may have given him the opportunity to further expand his own writing horizons, which may have led to Load and Reload as a duality of albums. First of all, maybe only being released as a singular album, but secondly, also having material that didn't feel as jaggedy. And by that I mean like a roller coaster ride where half of one album seems strong while half of the other album seems strong, and put together they probably would have been a beast of a disc, but instead we got two that were just kind of meh and okay. Cliff Burton may have actually helped the band realize this, but I really doubt it. Whenever we get into the St. Anger cycle, however, it's very, very different. That's actually where I feel that things are going to get a little bit... yeah. That's the cycle where I believe that St. Anger does not happen. And I'm sure that that causes a lot of hoorays out there, and a lot of people probably also looking at me saying it's probably just because you don't like the album. No, it's in reality based around the idea that James getting clean and everything like that would probably be a priority that Cliff would have probably pushed for, something that he would have certainly respected James for doing. And even though that the sound was, the rawness of the sound was certainly one of the difference points, but also now you don't have Bob Rock playing bass and having that large of an influence. Now you actually have three members of the band that are really conducting where this album is going, with James adding in his own cycle and his own real ideas that he's getting from fuming from going to rehab and treatments. And I think the resulting album is still very raw. It still has very much the same exterior that St. Anger is able to really showcase, but I think you're once again going to find that the songwriting has a little bit more to offer, and I think you're also going to see that even with that garage rock feel that the album really, gave to the world, it's one that also is a little bit more focused, one that didn't have as much repetition inside of it. Whenever it comes to Death Magnetic and what follows after that, well, it's anybody's guess. But like I said, I really think that Cliff Burton, if he would have remained alive, would still be with the band today and would be an Iron Man. And whenever it comes to the albums themselves, what you're mainly going to see different is from a compositional value, and whether or not some songs make it or some don't, considering Cliff was an active writer within the band. So, in reality, perhaps he needed to die in order for the Black Album to be the smash success that it was. Maybe some of the songs that would have been cut are ones that ended up being huge hits. It's really hard to say, but I think that Cliff Burton wouldn't have affected all of that much. I just think that maybe the writing would have had a little bit of a different effect to it. So, take that for what it's worth. Now, for those of you who are wondering about Lars Ulrich and what if he died, as opposed to Cliff Burton, well, that's whenever things get a little bit more complicated, considering there's two paths that I could see. One of them you're probably going to either love or hate, and the other one, well, you're probably going to criticize me for. So, either way I lose. Or, either way I win. It's kind of hard to say. Now, with Cliff Burton's death, the band actually moved on for his benefit. They said that it was probably what he wanted, and I really think that they were right, considering whenever you experience that kind of a loss, it's certainly not one where you should just give up. It doesn't seem to make that much sense. But there is one side of that actually says that if Lars Ulrich dies, being one of the founders of the band, and considering the way in which the drumming market at that time was sort of rolling, so unless you kind of go deep and find somebody, it's going to be hard to find another drummer. there is a portion of the universe that probably believes that if Lars Ulrich would have died, Metallica would have died too. They would have been a 3-album band. Master of Puppets would have been a masterpiece, and then that would have been that. They would have gone their separate ways, or they would have done something else with their lives. In reality, though, it probably would have been the same situation as it was with Cliff. That somebody would come to take over the reins, and that would have been what, Lars wanted. And the names that actually come to mind are kind of surprising. The first one that comes to mind is Dave Lombardo from Slayer. But this is also one that probably isn't going to happen, considering a couple of weeks prior to the death of what would be Lars Ulrich in this case, Slayer just released Rain and Blood, which ended up being a transformative album for their career. So there's no way you could probably seduce Dave Lombardo away. But there is a name that you probably could seduce away, considering you wouldn't have to seduce him at all. Considering he was already gone, considering he was already vacated and looking for work. Gar Samuelson, yeah, Megadeth. 1986, he was booted from the band after they released Peace Cells, but he was buying, and was kind of looking for something to do. And he was, well, at that point, doing nothing but drugs. Now, even though this may have not been a great fit from that perspective, it's something where Gar would have certainly been a great temporary replacement that could have actually become a bit of a bona fide fit, at least for a short period of time. I don't necessarily think that this would have been a fit that would have lasted for any more than a couple of albums, considering Gar, for all of his influence and all of his legendary ability, was certainly one that struggled a lot mightily with addiction. But I think that for at least the first album after the death of Lars Ulrich, that Gar would be a suitable replacement. And maybe he even ends up on the Black Album, or maybe that's where he leaves. Maybe he protests the whole idea of the Black Album and the direction, and he actually plays that role of hero that most people associate with Cliff Burton had he still been alive. It's definitely that whole outsider idea. The one thing I will say is that if Lars ended up dying, I think this would be a position that would be more of a revolving door than the bass position has been for the band ever since Cliff Burton's departure. Considering, technically speaking, ever since he died, the band has had 3 different bassists. And yeah, I am throwing Bob Rock into that mix. I know other bands have gone through more members than that in shorter periods of time. In fact, it's not all of that bad of a revolving door. It's one that's moving very slowly, so to speak. I really think, though, that the drummer's position would be one that they'd sort of struggle in order to keep. And Lars would go down as a Plymouth, a real smash hit. Really as a martyr a little bit. Think about all of the praise that Cliff Burton gets. Now imagine Lars being the one that gets that credit. Credit that he actually does deserve, considering he's a damn good drummer. But at the same time, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering what would have happened after the year 2000. Well, the question is, first off, who's their drummer? And second of all, is the band even still around? Like it or not, Lars was a pretty instrumental figure in that band. One that's pretty largely important. It's very possible that after James's pyrotechnic accident that the band just kind of decides to call it a day. Think that the heavens and hell is against them. But for what it's worth, you could easily probably get, a lot of different individuals in the 1990s. Remember, at that point in time, a lot of thrash metal bands had kind of decided to call it quits for a bit, or on hiatus, or, whatever. Think about Exodus, think about Testament, think about Heathen. There are a lot of bands that, after a couple of albums in the 1990s, just sort of went on hiatus, went on vacation, or just didn't appear until the first portion of the 2000s. So there were a lot of drummers that were available. Hell, Dave Lombardo was available. So, there you go. You could potentially have that be something that occurs. Whichever way that you see it, Lars Ulrich is definitely a principal member that's had a big influence, so the music may have been a little bit different. I still think that the Black Album occurs in this situation, although it's going to be one where finding a permanent drummer may be a bit of a struggle in this age, considering the album was still very thrash-oriented, but was certainly a bit different than what these individuals were used to playing in the 1980s, so that may be a big struggle point. Load and Reload? Wow. Lombardo almost seems like the perfect fit for that. But who knows? We may never know. In fact, we will never know, considering that's not how history happened. But I want to know what you guys think. Who would have potentially replaced Lars Ulrich had he been the one who passed away? Do you think that Jason Newsted was the best choice for Metallica after the death of Cliff Burton? And also, on a more solemn and really heartfelt note, leave your memories, leave your thoughts, and leave your love about Cliff Burton in the comments below. Till the next episode of What If, where we ask the tough questions of what would have happened if different things would have happened. Coverkillernation, rest in peace, Cliff. We miss you every single day, every single year. Hail Metallica, hail metal, hail Cliff.